Okay. Good morning. I'd like to introduce to you our speaker, Linda Alpert. After retiring from a long career in the legal and financial industries, Linda became a certified Master Gardener in 2022. She is an active member of the Master Gardener organization and currently serves on the Board of Trustees as the Operations Secretary. Linda has always enjoyed the magic of gardening and loves sharing her enthusiasm for gardening with others. She is especially fond of English cottage-style gardens, but loves visiting gardens of all types. She enjoys starting flowering plants from seed and challenging herself to grow new and different varieties each season. So thank you, Linda. I'm turning it over to you now.
Welcome. Thank you, Debbie, and welcome fellow garden enthusiasts to the Seedy side of gardening, starting seeds indoors for a beautiful flower garden. We have a lot of material to cover today, so I'm going to jump right in. Seeds are magical. Seeds are plants in a state of suspended animation. Most seeds consist of three parts: the embryo, which is a tiny plant with a root, a stem, and one or more leaves; the endosperm, which is stored food, often made up of starch, oil, and protein; and the seed coat, which is the protective coating to keep seed viable for long periods of time. Seeds lie dormant until water, oxygen, temperature, or light come along like Prince Charming and break dormancy. Today, I will cover the following topics. I will share why I start plants from seed. We'll review supplies to set you up for success. We'll talk about seeds. We'll talk about when to start your seeds indoors. We'll go through the steps to grow your plants from seed, and we'll briefly discuss some pests and diseases. And lastly, we'll talk about hardening off. So why do I start plants from seed? I start plants from seed because it is a magical process to witness. When a seed germinates, the first thing to emerge is the embryonic root, called the radicle. It is followed by the embryonic stem, called the hypocotyl, and one or more embryonic leaves, called the cotyledons. The cotyledons supply food until the true leaves appear. There is something about watching a seemingly lifeless seed transform into a beautiful plant that just never gets old for me. However, the main reason I grow plants from seed is because there are more varieties of plants available. And so here's one example. This is a marigold called Jolly Jester, and it looks like a pinwheel, right? I've never seen a marigold that looks like this. When I first saw the seed packet, I thought, there's no way that it's going to look like this. And to my shock, it really did. I've never seen Jolly Jester marigolds sold at my nursery. The only way I can have Jolly Jester marigolds is if I grow them myself from seed. Another example is this white Thunbergia, also called black-eyed Susan vine. I, on occasion, have seen the orange kind or the yellow kind for sale at some more specialty garden centers, but I've never seen the white kind available. And when people visit my home, they always ask me about what is this? They've never seen such a thing, and it's a beautiful plant. And the only way I can have this plant is to grow it from seed. And one more example is this beautiful cupcakes white cosmos. The petals are fused, so the flowers look like cupcake wrappers. Again, I've never seen this for sale at my garden center, and the only way I can have this beautiful flower in my garden is to grow it from seed. So hopefully I have piqued your interest in starting plants from seed. Now let's talk about the supplies to set you up for success. We're going to begin by going through supplies needed for germination, and then the last three supplies on my list are for taking care of seedlings after germination. So germinating seeds is a slightly different process than actually growing on the seedlings, and so it's something to keep in mind. So the first supply you're going to need is a container. A container can be anything with good drainage as long as it's clean, like a cup with a hole in the bottom. When I used cups like this, I used to use a cup in a cup method, which means I would have a cup with a hole in it and I would put it in another cup that did not have a hole in it. And this made bottom watering very easy. We'll talk about bottom watering later. And it also kept my surfaces clean. But recycled food containers make very good seed starting containers also. You punch some drainage holes in them and you're good to go. This one even comes with its own built-in humidity dome. So be creative. You can be very creative when it comes to containers for seed starting. When it comes to containers you can purchase, there are many options. One option is expanding or magic grow peat pellets. You add water and the containers magically pop up. And they're very convenient because they already come with the growing media and a humidity dome. And I've used these and they work fine, but they're not my favorite because I find they're hard to label. I rarely am growing a whole tray of the same type of seed. So it's important for me to be able to label each container. But these are fine. I've used these and I was very successful with them. Another container you can purchase is a traditional cell or plug tray. These come in all sizes. I've seen them from 16 plugs to 200 plugs. They're very efficient because you can germinate a large amount of seeds using very little soil and very little space. However, they're not flexible for me. When one seed germinates, you have to make a decision for the whole tray. You can't just put that one cell under the grow lights. So they're not as flexible as I would like. I also find them a little messy to fill. I'm generally gardening on my kitchen counter, so I don't have the luxury of being messy. So what I like to use are these individual reusable pots. They give me the flexibility that I need. I find them easy to fill because I can easily just fill each one up one at a time without making a mess in my kitchen. And if one of the cells germinates, I can easily pluck that cell out and put it under the grow lights. I don't have to make a decision for the whole tray. They also come in different sizes. I like the 2.5 inch size because it gives me the best of both worlds in the sense of it's not so big that I'm wasting space, but it's big enough that I actually don't have to transplant or pot up my seedlings before I plant them outside. So it saves me time later to use this 2.5 inch size. But I'll give you a closer look. Here's a closer look at my setup. The individual pots sit in this black egg crate with drainage holes, and then that tray sits inside another tray without drainage holes. And it really does give me the best of both worlds because I have the flexibility to move the individual pots around when I want to. But then because of the black tray, when I want to treat it as a whole tray for watering or for moving it around, I can easily do that. And then the tray without holes makes it very easy to bottom water the seedlings and it contains the mess. So I like this system. And then my system also includes a humidity dome. We'll talk about humidity domes later, but I like just recycling everything and reusing it every year. So at the end of my season, I just clean my containers. I use a 10% bleach solution and they're ready to go for the next year. But I encourage you to try different containers and see what works for you, because what works for me may not be the best solution for you. So be creative and see what sort of containers you like. The next supply you'll need if you're planting more than one type of seed, because trust me, you will not remember what you planted. You're going to need labels. And just like containers, you can be very creative when it comes to labels. Popsicle sticks, plant labels, cut up mini blinds, they all work very well. Some people even use a chart where they map out the tray on paper. I like to use painter's tape on each container. And the reason I like to use painter's tape is that there's nothing sticking out to get in the way of my humidity dome. The labels can't fall out, and each container can be moved around individually. And then when I'm finished, because it's painter's tape, it easily removes from my containers. The next supply you'll need is growing media. You want to use a soilless, uniform, well aerated, and loosely packed growing media. Typically, it's composed of peat moss or coconut coir, vermiculite, and perlite. Whatever you do, do not use garden soil. Garden soil is too heavy. It can contain weeds, it can contain insects and disease. Don't use garden soil. And you'll see in this picture, I'm in the process of pre-moistening my soil. We'll talk about this later, but you don't want to use dry soil when you're potting up your seeds. You want to pre-moisten the soil. But we'll talk more about that later. Any good brand of seed starting mix will work. And you can also use a good quality all-purpose potting mix as long as it has good drainage. You can improve the drainage by adding perlite, and I would also recommend passing the potting mix through a sieve to remove any big pieces and forest products so you're left with a uniform, well-aerated mix. I personally use a seed starting mix each year just for fun. I try a different mix, and so far I haven't noticed any differences. The fourth supply in our list is a mister. If you were to use a stream of water to water in your seeds, you risk knocking the seeds out of the pot or moving them deeper into the soil. You can also displace the soil and compact it. So when you plant the seeds, you want to mist them in. And you can use a traditional mister like I have in the picture on the left. But I have to give a shout out to my mister, which is this rechargeable mister that I'm in love with. If you have any trouble with your hands, the squeezing motion, these rechargeable misters are fantastic. You press a button, it mists, you press a button, they shut off. A lot of fun to use. Next, you're going to need a way to create humidity. Seeds need constant moisture to germinate. So to do this, you can use plastic wrap or a proper humidity dome. And you can see in this picture why I like my painter's tape. See how low the humidity dome is? And even with plastic wrap, how if a plant label was sticking up, how it would get in the way. So we're going to talk about this later, but as soon as the seedlings germinate, the plastic wrap with the humidity dome is removed. You only want the humidity dome on while you're germinating the seeds. So this next supply, it's one that you don't really need, but I have it on my list because for me, it was a game changer. And I'm calling it a dry sink, but basically I use a large, deep storage container that's big enough to hold my seed trays with room to spare. I do all my misting and watering and fertilizing in it, and it just contains the mess. This, in the picture, it's on the floor, but when I use it, it's on a bench, so it's waist high and very convenient to use. Otherwise, if I didn't use a dry sink, everything would get wet. And this way, I don't worry about mildew on my walls or on my floor. I highly recommend using a dry sink. The last supply on our list for germinating seeds is a heat mat. But you may not even need a heat mat. Actually, one of my pet peeves is when I hear people automatically say, put it on the heat mat, you're going to need a heat mat, because there's two factors that determine if you need a heat mat. And let me just say, a heat mat increases the soil temperature by 10 to 15 degrees, and you place the tray on top of the heat mat. And the two factors that determine if you need a heat mat are the temperature of the room that you're germinating your seeds in and the temperature that the seeds need to germinate. So in this example, these seeds need a temperature between 60 and 75 degrees to germinate. If I'm germinating these seeds in my room that I keep at 70 degrees, I don't need a heat mat. But if I were germinating these seeds in my basement or in my garage that's between 50 and 55 degrees, then I would need a heat mat. So you may not need a heat mat. I actually rarely use a heat mat, but depending on your circumstances, you may need one. So now we finished talking about the supplies useful for germination. Now we're going to focus on supplies needed to take care of the seedlings after germination. And the most important supply you will need post-germination is artificial light. You will not have stocky seedlings that look like this with only light from a window. The seeds will stretch towards the light and get leggy, and stems can get weak. When it comes to artificial lights, there's lots of ready-made setups you can purchase. They're available in all shapes and sizes. They're convenient because they come with everything you need, but they can be a little pricey. An alternative is to make your own setup. It would typically consist of a 4-foot wide shelving rack, because that's the length that the lights come in, to hold seedlings, and 4-foot long shop lights on chains above the seedlings. The lights are directly above the seedlings, so the seedlings will grow straight, since the seedlings will always grow towards the light. And the lights are on chains, so they can be moved up and down. You generally start with the lights 2 to 4 inches above your seedlings, so your seedlings do not stretch towards the light, and you raise the light slowly as the seedlings grow. So what kind of artificial lights should you use? You do not need expensive blue or red grow lights. Your seedlings are only staying indoors for a short period of time until you can put them outside. So high output fluorescent or LED shop lights, regular shop lights will work fine. If you already have fluorescent lights, you can use them. If you are on the market to buy shop lights to grow seeds, I would recommend you get LED lights. They're cool to the touch. They're more energy efficient. You want to make sure, this is the key, you want to make sure that the shop lights you buy have a lumens rating, which is the light intensity of over 3,000, and a color temperature, which is the Kelvin or the brightness of between 5,000 and 6,500, which is the daylight range. 5,000 is a more yellow daylight, and 6,500 is a more white daylight. As long as your lights meet this requirement, you're good to go. So to put it in perspective, the lights I use LED shop lights. They have a lumens of 5,200, which is over 3,000, and my Kelvin is 6,500, which is a white daylight. And I've been very successful growing all sorts of seedlings with these lights. So you do not need expensive blue or red grow lights. One thing you do need, though, is a timer along with the lights. The lights need to be on between 12 to 16 hours. And you may think that you're going to remember to turn those lights on when you get up or shut them off before you go to bed. But believe me, you will forget. Do yourself and your seedlings a favor and get a timer along with the lights. This way you set it and you forget it. And it doesn't have to be a fancy timer. It doesn't have to be a special timer for growing seeds. I actually use like a smart plug, the picture on the left, and I set it up through my phone. It's technically not a timer, but it comes on and it comes off, and I set it and I forget it, and I'm good to go. So with lights, I just wanted to share a personal story. When I was just starting out, I started seeds on my windowsill like everybody does, and it worked, but to a point. My seedlings, they were leggy and they did not look like seedlings I saw at the nursery or at the big box stores. I knew that if I wanted to take my seedlings to the next level, I needed to purchase artificial lights. So I bought lights on the internet, but I made a mistake and I thought I was buying 2-foot length lights, but really I bought 4-foot length lights. So they didn't fit where I was going to use them. And I didn't want to return them because I really needed them. I already had seedlings ready to go. So I figured since the LED lights do not get hot, I could zip tie them to an old table frame. And you could see here in the photo, I zip tied them to this IKEA C table. And then I put the whole contraption into a bathtub that we never use. My husband and I are empty nesters. We have this bathroom that the kids used to use, and it turned out to be the perfect spot for my grow lights. I had easy access to water, and the mess was all contained in the tub. Since my lights were zip tied, I couldn't move them. So instead, I moved the seedlings close to the lights by just propping them up with stools and books. And then as they grew, I removed the books. And for the first time in my life, my seedlings look like they came from a garden center. It was fantastic. And I just want to point out in the picture, you may see this yellow rectangle. I'll talk about this later, but that is a sticky trap that I use to see if I have fungus gnats. And if I do have them, how bad the infestation is. But we'll talk about that later. So my bathtub worked great. The only drawback to my bathtub setup was that I needed more space. I was hooked and I needed to grow more plants, and there wasn't enough room. So I wound up purchasing a metal wire shelving unit, but I still didn't have chains for my lights. So I continued to use zip ties and I used boxes to prop my seedlings up to the lights. Eventually, I purchased fancy pulleys and I can now raise and lower my lights and I have a fancy schmancy setup. But I wanted to share my story with you to say you don't need a fancy schmancy setup. My bathtub contraption worked just as well as my new fancy setup. As long as it works, that's all that matters. So don't feel like if you use artificial lights, it has to work or look a certain way. If you can't move the lights towards the seedlings, move your seedlings towards the lights. So the next supply that you're going to need is a fan. Fans get the seedlings used to wind. They make the stem stronger. The air circulation helps prevent diseases like damping off, and we'll talk about damping off in a little bit. And then finally, the last supply on our list is fertilizer. So depending on the growing media you use, when the first set of true leaves appear, you're going to want to fertilize your seedlings. And what I mean by that is if you use seed starting mix, it's not going to have fertilizer in it. And remember, I talked about the cotyledons. They supply food until the first leaves appear. Once the first set of true leaves appear, the food source from the cotyledons is depleted. So you need supplemental fertilizer. If you used a potting mix that had fertilizer in it, you may not need to fertilize your seedlings. So when you're using fertilizer, you want to use a dilute solution of a balanced water-soluble fertilizer, about 1/4 to 1/2 inch strength. Follow directions on the label. It's always better to under-fertilize than over-fertilize because you can't take back. If you fertilize the seedling, you can't take it back. The seedling could be damaged, it could be burnt. But if you didn't fertilize it enough, and the plant will tell you when it needs more fertilizer, you'll see that it's sort of yellow. You can always fertilize it again or add more fertilizer. So it's always better to err on the side of not fertilizing. And that's basically our list of supplies. Are there any questions at this point?
Oh, yeah. So if anyone had asked a question, and I know for sure it's further on in Linda's talk, I just put it into answered and said we're going to answer it live. So Linda, everybody loves your seed containers. Is there a name for them? And can you share where you got them?
Oh, the colorful ones?
Yeah.
They're from a company called Bootstrap Farmer. I like them because they're very, you could stand on them and not crush them. And I think I'm on my 5th year of using them.
I just like the colors. Can you tell us the brand of your LED lights?
I don't know offhand because I got them from the internet a while ago. That's something I guess I could have find out. But the main part is to find something that has the lumens and the Kelvin within that range.
Okay, and then one last one. Oh, maybe not. What's the difference between products labeled fertilizer versus plant food?
Plant food, I think I'm not sure that there's much of a difference, right? Like plant
No.
food is a
Right.
fertilizer.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Can you go over the height of the lights over the seedlings as they grow again, please?
So you want to keep it around 2 to 4 inches above the seedlings because the whole idea is to keep the seedlings stocky. This is a situation where it's good to be short and stocky. So you don't want them to stretch towards the light. So always 2 to 4 inches. Think of it as like a carrot in front of a horse. You're sort of always just keeping them just out of the reach of the seedlings. And if they're too close, you'll see the seedlings get a little burnt. It's not going to, then you know, okay, I have them too close.
And you said somebody's asking to repeat where you got the pots. Bootstrap Farm?
Farmer, Bootstrap Farmer.
Farmer. Okay.
We don't endorse any company.
Yeah. Oh, somebody found it and put it in the questions. Thank you, Arena. I think that's it. Yeah, we'll get to the other ones.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. So
Oh,
next,
wait.
up.
Have you used Gardener Supply? They have silicone pots, but not colorful. Have you used them? Where do you get most of your supplies?
So I like colorful, pretty things. So that's why I use the Bootstrap Farmer, but really any container is going to work. So the Gardener Supply containers are very good quality containers as well.
All right. Hold on. I never used a fan. How often and how far away from the seeds?
So you move the fan around and you would just have the fan on all the time, really. And you could start it out slow if you're nervous or if you feel like if it's too strong, you'll see it on the seedlings that they'll look a little unhappy. But it also depends on the strength of the fan. So I use an oscillating fan now from when my kids were in college, and you all bought them the oscillating fans for their hot dorm rooms, and I keep it maybe a foot away, 1.5 foot away.
And can you put the fan on a timer like you do with the lights?
Yes, actually, when I think about it, mine is on a timer. I don't have the fan going when I go to sleep, but you could leave it on all the time.
Okay. Everything else we'll be getting to.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next thing we're going to talk about are seeds. You want to use viable seeds. There are many reputable sources for seeds. Just make sure to check the packet and use the seeds packed for the current growing season. So you'll see on the seeds, it'll say packed for 2025. Seeds packed for the current growing season will have the highest germination rates, and you want to set yourself up for success. It's important to read the seed packet and to support brands that provide good information on their seed packets. A good seed packet will tell you when to plant the seed, how deep to plant the seed, the best temperature for germinating the seed, the number of days to germination, any pre-treatment requirements, and we'll talk about pre-treatment requirements later in this presentation. Pre-treatment requirements are things that you need to do to the seed before you plant it, the packed for date, and in addition to any other information about the plant. So I cannot emphasize enough why you should buy seed packets with good instructions. Here is an example. So this is a seed packet for Cosmos. It says, sowing method for the seeds, direct sow. There are no instructions for sowing these seeds indoors. If you did not know any better, you would think that you needed to sow these seeds outside. However, the same seeds from different seed companies contain indoor sowing instructions. So really support seed companies that give you good instructions on the seed packets. When it comes to the seeds themselves, they come in different sizes. Seeds can be teeny tiny. Look how small these snapdragon seeds are next to this dime. One tip for planting teeny tiny seeds so that you're not planting too many of them is to wet an end of a toothpick. And the water makes the seeds stick to the toothpick. And that way you can, even though the seeds are teeny tiny, you can still very precisely plant teeny tiny seeds. Seeds can also be pelleted. And yes, the term of art is pelleted and not pelletized. Pelleted seeds are coated to make tiny seeds larger, so they're easier to see and handle. Pelleted seeds need consistent moisture to break down the coating. So I like to think of them as having like a candy coating on them that needs to break down. Pelleted seeds have a shorter shelf life than non-coated seeds, but sometimes pelleted seeds are primed. What that means is that the seeds are brought just to the point of germination, and then it's shut down, and then the seeds are coated. So primed seeds actually have a better germination rate than unprimed seeds. So don't be afraid of pelleted seeds. They generally have a good germination rate, and they're easy to handle and easy to see. How do you know if your seeds are pelleted? The seed packet will tell you. So here we see these are digitalis seeds that are pelleted. Other examples of seeds that you may find in a pelleted form are petunias, coleus, ageratum. You may see them both in the unpelleted and the pelleted form, and generally the pelleted form's a little more expensive. But don't be afraid of using the pelleted form. They're very easy to plant, and they don't really need anything special other than you want to keep them moist. Some seeds need pre-treatment in order to germinate. One type of pre-treatment is scarification. Scarification helps break dormancy and aids germination for seeds with hard shells. There's two ways to scarify seeds, and sometimes they're used in conjunction with each other. One way of scarification is to use a nail file or sandpaper to nick or rub a little bit of the outer shell off, just to let moisture get in. So you're not making a hole, you're just weakening the shell a little bit. And another method of scarification is to soak the seeds for 6 to 12 hours or overnight in warm water. And so here on the left, where the arrow is pointing, you could see where this is a Thunbergia seed. I just rubbed it just to rub a little of the brown off so that water can get in. And then on the right, I'm soaking seeds. And a tip that I can recommend is to use a coffee filter, because this way, when you want to drain the seeds, you don't worry about them going down the drain when you're draining out the water. You just lift the coffee filter out, and all the seeds are in the coffee filter, and you don't have to worry about draining the water and losing the seeds. So how do you know if your seeds need scarification? The seed packet should tell you, and this is a great seed packet. This seed packet not only talks about mentions that they need to be need scarification, but it also goes on to explain what scarification is. So even if you didn't know what scarification meant, as long as you followed these instructions, you'd be fine. So it says, nick the seeds with sandpaper or a knife. I wouldn't use a knife. I would stick with sandpaper or an emery board, and soak the water for 24 hours. These are great instructions. So this is Thunbergia and other examples of seeds that can need scarification to aid in germination are nasturtium, morning glories, and sweet peas. Another type of pretreatment is cold stratification. It's also called vernalization. Cold stratification is used for seeds that require a period of cold temperature and moisture in order to break dormancy. In nature, these seeds go through winter and they germinate in the spring. Cold stratification uses moisture and cold to imitate winter to stimulate germination and break dormancy. You cannot just put the seed packet in the fridge. You need moisture. So one method is to place the seeds in a damp paper towel with sand or peat moss and and then put that in a plastic bag and leave it in the fridge for 1 to 3 months. You can't just leave it though and forget it. You have to check the Ziploc bag to make sure the seeds are moist, to make sure there's no mold. So it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. Another method is to pot up the seed in moist growing media, cover that with plastic wrap and put that in the fridge for 1 to 3 months. With this method, you also have to check it periodically. I really don't like either method, although either method works fine and they're not hard. So don't be afraid of cold stratifying your seeds. So I'm kind of lazy. So what I do whenever I have seeds that need cold stratification is I just use winter sowing. Now, this isn't a presentation about winter sowing, but basically winter sowing is when seeds are sown in vented containers and placed outdoors in the winter to germinate under natural conditions. So instead of simulating winter, I give my seedlings actual winter. And in the spring, when the seeds would naturally germinate, they germinate. So if you don't want to bother with either of those two cold stratification methods that I mentioned, winter sowing is a perfect way to germinate seeds that need cold stratification. So how do you know if your seeds need cold stratification? Again, the seed packet, a good seed packet will tell you. And here for this cardinal flower, we can see it says seeds germinate after 60 days of cold, moist stratification. Other seeds that benefit from cold stratification are milkweed, lupine, and pincushion flower. Okay, so we have our seeds. When should we start them indoors? You don't want to start them too early because then it'll be too cold to plant them outside. And we don't want to start them too late because we want our seedlings to reach maturity, right? If we're growing tomatoes, we want to get tomatoes. If we're growing flowers, we want to see them flower before the fall comes or the winter comes. So there's a sweet spot as to when to start your seeds. So if we look at this seed packet for the snapdragons, it says you can sow the seeds 8 to 10 weeks before the last frost. Okay, so what does that mean? What is a last frost? In our area, Mother's Day is typically used as the day of the last frost. But why? Why is it Mother's Day? So I like this chart from the National Gardening Association because it helps explain why we use Mother's Day as the last frost date in our area, which is New Jersey. If we look at the blue arrow, we see that 32 degrees, which is freezing, that there's a 10% chance that we will still have 32-degree weather by May 3rd, which means it's highly unlikely that we're going to have a frost by May 3rd, that it's going to be 32 degrees. But many people don't use 32 degrees as the benchmark. They actually use 36 degrees as the benchmark because a frost can still occur above 32 degrees, even though it's rare, due to radiative cooling. So if we use 36 degrees as the benchmark, we're being super conservative, we see that on May 12th, there is a 20% chance of frost, which means that we're very highly unlikely to have frost on May 12th. This year, Mother's Day is May 11th, which is really close to May 12th. So you can see why Mother's Day is used as the conservative day as the last frost date. But I like this chart because it gives me all the data I need to take a calculated risk in choosing my last frost date. I don't necessarily use Mother's Day as my last frost date. Some people, like myself, like to push the envelope and use 50% as the cutoff for determining when the last frost date is. And to put this in perspective, the Farmer's Almanac, which a lot of people use, they actually uses a 30% chance in their recommendations. All right, so how do we figure out what day to start our seeds? Let's calculate it. So we see that we're going to use Mother's Day for argument's sake. We'll be very conservative. And we see that our seed packet says start them 8 to 10 weeks before the last frost date. So we have Mother's Day, May 11th. We're going to count back 8 weeks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That brings us to March 16th. We're going to count back to 10 weeks. So that's 9, 10. That brings us to March 2nd. So that means we have 3 weeks that we can start our seeds. That's a sweet spot. We can start the seeds the week of March 2nd, March 9th, or March 16th. And when it comes to selecting which is the best day or the best week to start your seeds in that window, in that sweet spot, you pick a day that's good for you. You pick a day you have nothing going on. You pick a day you're going to be home. You pick a week that works for you. It's just a little range of 3 weeks that you can plant your seeds. So I plant a lot of seeds. So it's important for me to stay organized. So what I do is in the winter, I did it actually a couple weeks ago. I sit with the seeds that I'm going to plant and I look at the labels and I see how many weeks before the last frost they need to be planted. And I use an Excel spreadsheet, but you can use a notebook or you could even just put the seed packets themselves in this order. But I basically make note of, okay, 8 to 10 weeks, okay, 2 to 4 weeks. And then I sort them so that all the 8 to 10 weeks are together, all the 2 to 4 weeks are together. And then I look at the calendar and I count back as we just did for each type to get the date range of when I should start my seeds. And I look at my own personal calendar and decide, okay, this is the week I'm going to start my seeds. And then I take the actual seed packets and I bundle them together so that all the seeds that need to be started the same week are together. And this way, when it comes time to plant my seeds, I don't have any anxiety, right? I'm not like overwhelmed. Oh my God, what do I start? Where do I begin? What should I plant? I've already decided what's getting planted when. And so when it's time to plant my seeds, I just grab the bundle for that week and I'm ready to go. Are there any questions at this point?
Yes. Okay. Oh, how long do seeds stay viable?
So seeds can stay viable for a very long time, like years and years and years, but they all won't be viable for years and years and years. And there's ways to test the viability of your seeds. But I say if you're a beginner, don't bother with that. Just go with seeds packed for your growing season because you'll have the best success. And then if you're successful, you'll want to do it again. I'm using old seeds for some of my seeds. I'm not rebuying the same seeds every year, with the exception maybe of the pelleted seeds. But I'm willing to take the chance that if they may not all be viable. And so when I know I'm dealing with old seeds, instead of planting one, I may plant 2 or 3, knowing that they may not all wake up from dormancy.
And I think it depends too on the type of seed it is.
Very
Some
true.
seeds just live longer. There's
Very
an
true.
excellent book, and the author is Nancy Bubel, Bubel. It's been around for quite a while, and it's called The Seed Starter's Handbook. And she has an excellent chart in there. I've been using it for years of all the viability in years that you can expect from different types of seeds.
That's great.
Okay. Are either annuals or perennials easier to grow from seed?
It's the same. The difference is with the annual, you're going to get a flower that year. Where the perennial, depending on the perennial, it may not flower that year, but they are all equally, in my experience, they're all equally easy to grow.
Just some perennials are more likely to need stratification.
Very true.
So talking about the last frost date, all of New Jersey doesn't have the same frost date, along the coast, it's earlier. So I think what you were going by is, what did you say, May 15th?
May 11th. I
May
picked
11th.
Mother's Day because that's what that's really the rule of thumb. That's the very conservative, safe day is Mother's Day.
Right. And that's what we call the safe planting day. And that's better than going by your last frost date because we know anything can happen.
Correct.
Best seeds for beginner. How to factor in light outside. I'm not sure what that means. So the best seeds for beginners.
I had luck in the beginning with marigolds. And if you're looking for a beautiful plant for the cooler weather, snapdragons. Snapdragons are the seedlings are so sturdy that you can pull them out and repot them, and their roots don't care. So if I were starting out, I'd say marigolds and snapdragons. And in terms of vegetables, radishes, because radishes they have such a short period that you'll have success. Like within a month, you'll be eating radishes. You'll be very happy.
That was somebody asked about planting seeds with kids, so that's a good rule for them as well.
Radishes are wonderful for kids. During COVID, I grew radishes on my windowsill.
Beautiful.
Radishes are great.
So earlier you spoke about misting and bottom watering. Do you do both or start with misting and moisten soil, then switch over to bottom watering at some point? Good
The
question.
misting is when you are in the germinating process. So when you're waiting for your seeds to germinate, you want to mist them. Once the seeds germinate, you're going to switch to bottom watering, and we'll talk about bottom watering in a little bit.
Then what do you think are the best seeds for winter sowing? I mean, that could be a whole talk.
Yeah, I think native plants are good for winter sowing, like coneflowers, Rudbeckia, milkweed. Truthfully, anything I've planted with winter sowing has been happy. I wouldn't use warm season. So let me take that back. For winter sowing, if it says sow it in the fall, if it says sow it in the early spring, those are great for winter sowing. You can technically winter sow anything. It's just you wouldn't start it in the winter. Like you could winter sow tomatoes, but you wouldn't plant them out until April. So you can winter sow anything. But in terms of like, if you're going to plant them in January, snapdragons, anything that is like a hardy annual or a hardy perennial, cold hardy, or anything that would self-sow naturally. Poppies, winter sowing, you will be so successful to winter sow poppies.
And someone's asking, have you saved your own seeds and used them? I think you said you did, right?
I actually have saved my own seeds. Last year I harvested seeds from a beautiful Amsonia plant, and I winter sowed them, and I couldn't believe how many came up. And the same thing with the milkweed.
Okay, if you're using a container that's all connected and not separate planters, and some of the seeds do not germinate and many do you reseed or leave it?
That's up to you. So you could reseed them, but if once so what that's the part I don't like about when you use those trays is you have to make a decision for the tray. So once those seeds have germinated, you've removed the humidity cover, and now you're putting them under the grow lights. So in that situation, I actually wouldn't reseed because you have no way to keep the moisture in. You're putting the tray at that point under the grow lights. But I use the individual containers. So when the seeds don't germinate, I actually reuse those pots and I'll plant. Usually it's the same thing that I'm planting in them because I can separate them out. And I could keep the ones that didn't germinate under the humidity dome and just pull out the ones that have germinated.
So somebody is also asking, she saved seeds from vegetables, suggestions for growing these seeds. I think the concern is if you save them from a hybrid vegetable, you probably won't get the same thing as what you save them from. But otherwise you would just grow them the same, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think everything else we're going to get to, so we're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now we're going to walk through the whole process of starting seeds. So you're going to gather all your materials together, and then the first thing you're going to do is pre-moisten the growing media. The way to test that your growing media has the proper amount of moisture is to squeeze it into a ball. If you squeeze it and it doesn't hold the ball shape, it's too dry, you want to add more water. If you squeeze it and water's dripping out, it's too wet, you want to add more of the seed starting mix. So once you have moist soil, then you are going to fill your containers. And you can see in this photo why I like my individual containers. I just scoop them in, and that doesn't make any mess. And then you'll label your containers. And then the next thing you're going to do is to plant the seeds. And I know the question is going to be, how deep do I plant the seeds? So what you want to do is follow the instructions on the seed packet. And you could see on this seed packet, it says, sow seeds 1/4 inch deep. 1/4 inch is not a lot. It's better to plant the seeds too shallow than too deep. So you want to follow the instructions, but keep in mind that 1/4 inch is not a lot. One reason that seeds do not germinate is that people plant them too deeply. You don't want to automatically poke fingers in the pots and plant the seeds very deeply. If you don't have instructions, the rule of thumb is to plant the seed twice the width of the seed. So smaller seeds get more shallowly planted, and bigger seeds would get planted more deeply. Some seeds need to be surface sown. They need light to germinate. And you could see the seed packet for the Snapdragon says surface sow. This means don't cover it with any growing media. Resist the urge to cover them. You could see in this picture, this happens to be a pelleted seed. I've placed the seed on top of the surface of the growing media. I am done. Walk away. Do not cover this. You want to leave it uncovered. So it's important to follow the instructions on the seed packet. Not all seeds get buried very deeply. The next step that you will do is mist the seeds. You're going to put on the humidity dome. You're going to use a heat mat if you need a heat mat, and you're going to check every day for germination and dryness. If when you check it, it's dry, you're going to mist the seedlings. And one day when you go to check the seedlings, you're going to see the most incredible thing, which is germination. You could see in this picture on the left, the radicle has emerged from the seed. And the picture in the upper right, the cotyledons have emerged from the seed, it's pretty cool. At this point, once you have germination, you need to change your focus from germinating seeds to growing seedlings. It's a sort of a different process. So you're going to remove the humidity dome and heat mat if you used one. You're going to place the seedlings under lights. Now the seedlings, they need light, light, light. You're going to water the seedlings when the media is dry. How do you know when the media is dry? One way is the color of the growing media. So you can see in this photo, the cell in the middle is a lighter color. It's dry, as opposed to the cell to the left of it, which has enough moisture. Another way to tell if you need to water your seedlings is the pot feels lighter. A pot with water in it is going to feel heavier than a pot that needs to be watered. And it's very important to water the seedlings from the bottom. Watering the seedlings from the bottom keeps the foliage dry to prevent pathogens like damping off. And we'll talk about damping off in a little bit. Watering from the bottom ensures the water reaches the roots. It prevents the water stream from breaking delicate stems, and it prevents soil compaction. So you always want to water from the bottom once you have seedlings. You may need to fertilize the seedlings once the first true set of leaves appear if you use the seed starting mix that didn't contain fertilizer. So at this point, you're going to start fertilizing the seedlings. And then one thing you may have to do during this process is to thin your seedlings. If they're planted too closely together, you may have to thin them, because leaving them is only going to hurt both seedlings because they'll compete for nutrients. And it's very easy to do that. You pick the plant that you're going to keep, and then the one you're going to sacrifice, you'll just cut off with a scissor at the soil level.
Linda, can I just ask a question that has to do with that?
Sure.
So a couple people asked, do you recommend planting one seed per cell or multiple and then thinning them out?
I plant one. I think it's a matter of personal preference. I plant one seed per cell, especially if it's fresh seeds packed for that year, because I know that they're going to germinate. And then that way I don't have to worry about thinning out. But if they're very small seeds, and you can't help it. Like poppy seeds, think how small poppy seeds are. Sometimes you can't help but overplant them, and then you have to thin them out.
Okay, and then do you need to use the cells, or can you use a larger container and sew them in and then break them apart like you do with the winter sowing?
You can do that. It depends, and your success depends on the seeds you're growing. So, for example, snapdragon seeds are so hardy, and they're also small seeds, that when I have snapdragon seeds, I don't cut them from the ground. I'll actually pull out the one that I want to sacrifice because I know it can take the abuse, and I'll repot it up. So if it's a hardy kind of seedling, then you can plant them in sort of a communal container and then prick them out to put them in other, into separate containers later. But I feel like that's after you've already been successful growing seeds. I wouldn't necessarily start out that way because I don't know that you're necessarily setting yourself up for success depending on what sort of plants you're growing.
Right. Oh, good. You just answered another question. Is there a formula of the ratio of seeds you plant versus germination rate and how many plants you actually get?
I think if you're checking to see how viable your seeds are, there is. I don't know it off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
if you're buying seeds for the current growing season, that's not something you have to worry about. So there are tests people do. They'll put the seeds in moist paper towel to get them to germinate, and then based on how many germinate, then they'll sort of know how viable the seeds are.
Okay. Maybe I'm not understanding because they said not the seeds, the plants as they germinate. So I'm not sure. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. That was with somebody else. I'm sorry. When you fertilize after they're growing, do you fertilize from the top or bottom?
I fertilize when I'm watering them, so I actually bottom fertilize them.
Okay.
So that's it's easy to forget to fertilize them. That's actually a tip is when you fertilize them, think of it as watering them. So maybe not every time you water, but maybe every other time you water, you're going to add fertilizer to the water.
And do you think distilled water is better than tap water for watering?
I think it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think, somebody asked about seeds that should be put in the dark after you sow them.
There are some seeds that need darkness, and so those would be the ones that you would plant more deeply. I grew seeds once that I had to put them in a garbage bag because and you'll also see they'll sell black humidity domes for seeds that don't want any light. They need total darkness to germinate. But generally, those seeds, the instructions will tell you plant them deeply and cover them with soil so there's no light.
When growing flowers in a hanging pot from seed, do you just put all the seeds in the pot at once, or do you start them individually and then transplant into the hanging basket?
I start mine individually, but I think it's a matter of, again, that's a matter of choice. If you're going to start them in the pot, but I also think that if you're starting seeds in too big a pot, all that water is not good for the seeds. It's like you want a nice ratio of soil to the seed, in the sense of you can have too much soil when you're starting seeds indoors.
Okay, I'm going to let you finish. There's questions coming in, but I know you're going to get to hardening them off and everything. So I'm going to let you finish now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Another thing you may need to do during the process is pot up your seeds. So some signs that you may need to pot up your seeds is that the soil is drying up quickly, meaning you're watering them every day. The pot's all roots. If you pop it out of the little cell, you see it's just you don't really see growing media anymore. You just see roots, or you see the roots start coming out of the drainage holes, or the leaves are turning yellow. These are all signs that you may have to pot up your seedlings. Keep in mind that small cells need to be potted up sooner. So if you started your seeds out in a 200 cell plug tray, you may have to be thinking about potting up those seeds shortly after they germinate. Unlike me, I'm starting them in a 2.5-inch pot where I rarely have to pot them up. So potting up the seedlings may also be part of the process. So during this process, you're going to continue to check your seedlings each day. You're going to raise the lights as the plant grow. You're going to use a fan for good air circulation. You're going to continue to water and fertilize if needed until it's time to harden them off before you put them outside. And I love this picture because you can see the personality of each type of plant. I just love the patchwork of all the different beautiful baby plants. Okay, but before we finish off with hardening off, we're going to first talk about pests and diseases. I'm not going to cover all possible pests and diseases, but I thought it would be helpful to mention a few that you might encounter. The first disease that you may encounter, I hope you don't though, is damping off, which is fatal to the seedling. In damping off, the lower part of the stem near the soil surface collapses and the seedling just falls over and dies. Seedlings are only susceptible for a short period of time following emergence to damping off, so it's something that's going to happen early on if it happens. Damping off is caused by several soil-borne pathogens, which are found in the soil or on contaminated items. Damping off loves overly damp conditions with poor air circulation. So you're more likely to have damping off if you're overwatering the plants and or the seedlings and you don't have good air circulation. To prevent damping off, you don't want to overwater and you want to use a fan to improve air circulation. You also want to sterilize your pots with 10% bleach and clean your tools with a 70% alcohol solution. Another issue you may come across is white mold. White mold loves the same conditions that damping off likes, the overly damp with the poor air circulation. The difference is that white mold is not really harmful to your seedlings. White mold, just like damping off, can be found in the soil. The spores can be found in the soil or on contaminated objects. If you have white mold, just scrape it off. It's not going to kill your seedlings, and you'll prevent it by not overwatering and using a fan to improve air circulation. Another issue you may encounter is algae. Algae is caused by light and moist conditions. If the algae bothers you, you can use a light coat of vermiculite or sand. Eventually, your plant will grow and shade the soil, so the algae will go away. I'll also say, eventually, you're going to plant the seedling outside and the algae will go away. Algae does not harm your seedlings. So if you have algae, and you could see this is one of my seedlings, I have algae, you don't have to do anything if you have algae. It's not really going to do any harm. But one way to prevent algae is not to overwater and to use a fan to improve the air circulation. The last pest, and I guess the only pest that I'm going to talk about are fungus gnats. So fungus gnats are small flies that lay eggs in moist soil, and then those eggs hatch into larvae, which eat decaying matter in the soil, and they can eat the roots of your seedlings, but don't panic. They're likely not going to do any harm to your seedlings. To avoid fungus gnats, don't overwater and use a fan to improve air circulation. But if you have fungus gnats, don't beat yourself up because they likely came in with your growing media. So when you have fungus gnats, the likely cause is that they were in the growing media, the eggs were in the growing media. So you didn't necessarily do anything wrong. Although you could also have fungus gnats from like a house plant that has migrated to your seedlings. You have several options with fungus gnats. One is to ignore them. So you can see I have this yellow sticky trap, which I use as a warning device. Do I have fungus gnats? And if so, how bad is the infestation? If I just see one or two fungus gnats, I don't do anything. I ignore the nuisance. It doesn't bother me. If I were to have a lot, the yellow sticky trap would trap the adults that are flying around. But the adults that are flying around, they're not doing any harm. They're just looking to find each other so that they can lay eggs. The thing that could potentially hurt your seedlings are the larvae that are in the soil. If you want to get rid of the larvae in the soil, you would want to use a biological control. One is called Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, or BTI for short. It's applied as a drench. You would follow the instructions on the label. The larva would eat this bacteria and then they would die. So if you wanted to totally get rid of fungus gnats, you would want to use the yellow sticky traps to trap the adults. You're not going to trap all of them, but you'll trap most of them. And then you would use the BTI in the soil, which would kill the larvae and prevent them from becoming adults. But you also have the option to do nothing. I give you permission to do nothing if you have fungus gnats. A lot of people get freaked out about fungus gnats. Your seedlings are going to go outside where Mother Nature is going to take care of them. So if you have a small infestation of fungus gnats for a couple of weeks, it's not the end of the world. And then finally, 1 to 2 weeks before you plant your little seedlings outside, you want to start hardening them off. Hardening off is the process of gradually exposing seedlings to the outdoors. The reason you have to do it gradually is because the cuticle on the leaves of the plant has to toughen up so the plants don't get sun or wind burned. If you just put the seedlings out without hardening them off, they would go into shock and die. There's an art to hardening off because you have to take into account what you're planting, like the type of seedling you have and the weather, which you don't control. So it really is an art. It's balancing what's the temperature and do I have a delicate seedling or do I have a tough seedling? Hardening off takes about 1 to 2 weeks. And you start out on the first day by placing the seedlings in a shady, protected spot. You don't start out by putting them out in full sun. You put them out for about 1 to 2 hours, and you're going to put them out and set a timer. The last thing you want to do is to put your seedlings out and have them go into shock because you forgot about them and have all your hard work go down the drain. So you're going to set a timer, let the seedlings stay out for 1 to 2 hours. You're going to check them. If they look okay, the next day you're going to repeat the process, but for a little longer. And each day you're going to increase the amount of time that they have sun exposure till they're spending all their days outside, assuming that it's above freezing and it's not like a pouring rain that's going to hurt the seedlings. And then one evening, you're going to pick a night where the weather is expected to be good, above 50 degrees, and you're going to let your seedlings have a sleepover. You're going to let them spend the night outside. And then the next morning, you're going to check them. If they're okay, you're going to repeat the process till eventually your seedlings are spending their days and their nights outside. During this time of hardening off, you're going to be checking the temperature every day. Because if we are expecting a frost or like a really heavy rain, you're going to need to bring the seedlings back inside. And in this picture, you can see I like to bring mine inside because it's very easy for me to just put them in and, I put them on my deck, which is on the other side of the door. Some people don't like to bring them back inside. If so, you can put them in a garage, you can put them in a basement. If you're bringing them in just because we're expecting a pouring rain that's going to displace the soil, you can put them in a breezeway or some covered spot. But until we have passed that safe day where we're not expecting any more frosts, you have to be ready to bring the seedlings back in if there's frost or rain. At this point, once your seedlings are spending their days and nights outside, you have successfully grown plants from seed and you have completed the process. So I'd like to leave you with this picture of one of my flower beds where I have grown these beautiful plants from seed. I hope I have inspired you today to want to grow plants from seed for a beautiful garden. Thank you very much for your time today and happy seed starting.
Thank you, Linda. Now everybody knows why I call her the Martha Stewart of indoor seed starting. That was really great. So thank you everyone for being here. And if you have any questions about our coffee talks, please send them to me at dl1008@scarletmail.rutgers.edu. If you need the handout, if you registered late and didn't get it, if you want to register for the upcoming coffee talks, and you know what, I was supposed to put that in the chat. Let me do that right now. You can click on this link that I am putting in the chat. Just give me a second.
There was a comment here, just when you're watering, if you have a water softener, especially salt-based, just be careful.
We're going to go back, Linda.
Okay,
We're going to go back as soon as I finish this wrap
great.
up.
Thank you.
And also, Master Gardener helpline for Monmouth County, New Jersey residents. There is the address, you can send in your questions to us. And just a reminder that as soon as the webinar ends, there will be a survey. So if you'd like to share your feedback, we really appreciate it. It helps the speaker a great deal and helps us to provide information that you need to hear. So thank you again, and let's go back and finish up on the questions.
Okay, yeah, someone said just take care if you have a water softener, especially salt-based, because that could, it's salt, it could damage the seedlings.
I actually have a water softener that's salt-based, and I use my tap water and I'm fine.
Okay,
Because
beautiful.
the salt is not in the water. The salt is actually removed, is to clean the resins that are in the water softener.
I don't have one, so thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have to harden off if you're using a greenhouse?
So for the winds, but not for the sun. So I actually use a portable greenhouse that it's one of those plastic kind that they're very inexpensive. And I'll put my snapdragons in that, and I'll do it a little gradually in the beginning because they're a little protected, but then they harden off much more quickly. But if I actually sowed the seeds in the greenhouse, you do not have to harden them off because they're getting the sun, they're not getting artificial light.
Okay. And can you touch on using wood chips? I'm not sure what reference that is to.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And we don't send out the PowerPoint slides, but you will be able to watch this in the recording, right, Debbie?
That's correct.
Okay, I think that's it.
All right.
Everybody get out there and start your seeds.
Well, now that she made me ashamed of how I start my seeds. Now I know how to do it the right way. So thank you, everyone, again. And I'm going to stop the recording now.